At first, everyone thought the police dog had malfunctioned. His handler pulled the leash. Commands were given, but Duke refused to move. His eyes locked on a homeless man that thousands of commuters walked past every single day without a second glance. What this trained K-9 detected in that forgotten veteran would expose a truth that most people choose not to see, and what happened next shook an entire city to its core. Stay until the end, because Duke's instincts were about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't what we find, it's what we ignore. Before we begin, smash the like button, share this story, and subscribe, because real heroes don't always wear badges. Now, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories of courage and compassion travel. At first glance, it was just another gray Tuesday morning in the labyrinth of New York City's subway system. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their sterile glow on thousands of commuters flowing to the turnstiles like water through a dam. The air was thick with the familiar cocktail of coffee, perfume, and the metallic tang of train brakes. Above ground, Manhattan was waking up to another day of ambition and hustle. Below, in the veins of the city, life moved at its own relentless pace. Officer Sarah Chun adjusted her radio as she walked alongside her K-9 partner through the main corridor of Grand Central Terminal. Beside her, moving with the grace and precision of a trained athlete, was Duke, a 3-year-old Belgian Malinois with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. His vest, marked clearly with NYPD K-9 unit, caught the light as they moved through the crowd, a visible reminder of security in a city that never fully let its guard down. Sarah had been partnering with Duke for 18 months now, and in that time, they'd become more than handler and dog. They were a unit, communicating in glances and subtle shifts of posture that spoke louder than words ever could. Duke had been trained in narcotics detection, crowd control, and suspect apprehension, but what made him exceptional wasn't just his training. It was his instinct, that indefinable quality that separated good K-9s from great ones. The morning rush was building momentum. Businessmen in sharp suits checked their watches impatiently. A street performer's violin echoed through the vaulted ceiling, competing with the constant announcements crackling over the PA system. Sarah's eyes swept the crowd with practiced efficiency, noting the usual patterns, the expected behaviors. A mother struggling with a stroller, teenagers glued to their phones, tourists consulting maps with confused expressions. Pretty standard morning, huh, Duke? Sarah murmured, though her eyes never stopped scanning. Duke's ears twitched at her voice, but his attention remained focused ahead. They moved past the information booth, that iconic landmark in the heart of the terminal, where the four-faced clock kept time for millions of stories that intersected here daily. Sarah had always loved this assignment. There was something about the subway, the way it brought together every kind of person the city had to offer. Wall Street executives standing next to artists, students beside construction workers, all of them equal in their need to get somewhere. But Duke had stopped walking. Sarah felt the change immediately, the way his body tensed, the sudden shift from patrol mode to something else. His nose lifted slightly, nostrils flaring as he processed information invisible to human senses. His tail, usually in a relaxed position during patrols, went rigid. "What is it, boy?" Sarah's hand instinctively moved to his harness, her body language shifting from casual to alert. Duke pulled forward, not aggressively, but with purpose. His training held firm. He wasn't breaking formation, but he was clearly indicating something. Sarah's pulse quickened. In 18 months, she'd learned to read Duke's alerts like a language. This wasn't his drug detection signal. It wasn't his threat assessment posture either. This was something different, something she'd never quite seen before. They were near the entrance to Track 42, one of the older platforms that had seen better days. The crowd thinned here slightly, travelers preferring the more modern platforms. Against the far wall, partially obscured by a support column, sat a figure that most people's eyes seemed to slide right past. He was homeless. That much was immediately clear. A man, probably in his 50s, though the street had a way of adding years to faces, sat with his back against the cold tile wall. His clothes were layers upon layers, a practical armor against the city's indifference. A cardboard sign rested against his knee, the words too far away for Sarah to read. A worn military duffel bag sat beside him, and a small paper cup with a few coins sat hopefully in front of him. Most commuters gave him a wide berth, that instinctive urban maneuver of acknowledging someone's presence by pointedly not acknowledging it. A few dropped coins without making eye contact. One woman placed a wrapped sandwich beside him and hurried on before he could respond. Duke pulled harder now, his focus laser-locked on the homeless man. "Duke, heel!" Sarah commanded softly, but the dog barely responded. That alone sent alarm bells ringing in her mind. Duke never ignored commands. Never. She looked more carefully at the man. He wasn't moving much, his head bowed, shoulders hunched. One hand rested on his duffel bag in a protective gesture that spoke of someone who'd learned the hard way that everything you own can disappear in a moment of inattention. His other hand trembled slightly, fingers curled inward. Duke whined, a sound so unlike him that several nearby commuters turned to look. The dog's body was practically vibrating with urgency, every muscle coiled with the need to move forward. His eyes never left the homeless man, and his breathing had changed, become more rapid, more focused. Sarah's training kicked in. When your K-9 alerts, you listen. Always. No exceptions. "All right, Duke," she said quietly, loosening her grip on his harness slightly. "Show me." The dog moved forward immediately, not running but walking with intense purpose. Sarah followed, her hand near her radio, her mind running through possibilities. Drugs? Unlikely. Duke's drug alert was different. A weapon? Possible, but again, his body language was wrong for that. What was he detecting? They crossed the 20 feet to the homeless man in what felt like slow motion. Other officers might have hung back, called for backup, approached with more caution. But Sarah had learned to trust Duke implicitly. Whatever he was detecting, it wasn't a threat, at least not in the conventional sense. The homeless man looked up as they approached, and Sarah saw his eyes clearly for the first time. They were blue, faded like old denim, but there was intelligence there and something else. Pain. Deep, bone-weary pain that went far beyond physical discomfort. Duke didn't bark or growl. Instead, he did something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. He sat down directly in front of the man, close enough to touch, and placed one paw gently on the man's knee. Then he looked back at Sarah, and in that moment, she understood. This wasn't a detection alert. This was something else entirely. The homeless man's hand, the one that had been trembling, slowly reached out toward Duke. His fingers, dirty and scarred, hesitated in the air, as if he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to touch. His lips moved, forming words so quiet Sarah almost couldn't hear them. "Hey there, soldier." And that's when Sarah noticed it. The way the man sat, despite his circumstances, despite his obvious struggles. The military duffel bag wasn't just any bag. It had a faded unit patch, barely visible. The dog tags, tarnished for present, hanging from a chain around his neck. The boots, old and worn but clearly military issue, maintained as best as he could manage. This wasn't just a homeless man. This was a veteran. Duke's paw pressed more firmly against the man's knee, and the dog made a sound Sarah had never heard before. Not a whine, not a bark, but something almost like a purr, a rumble of recognition and comfort. The man's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. His trembling hand finally made contact with Duke's head, fingers tangling gently in the dog's fur. "I had a dog," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse and emotion. "In the service. Just like you, boy. Just like you." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of her own. She'd been seeing a homeless man. Duke had seen something else entirely. He'd seen a soldier who needed help, a brother in arms who'd fallen through the cracks. But as Duke continued to sit there, his focus unwavering, Sarah realized there was more to this moment. The dog's posture, the intensity of his attention. It wasn't just comfort he was offering. He was still alerting to something about this veteran that had triggered his training in a way Sarah had never encountered. She knelt down slowly, bringing herself to eye level with the man. "Sir," she said gently, "I'm Officer Chun. This is Duke. He seems pretty insistent about talking to you." The man's eyes flicked to her, then back to Duke, as if the dog was a lifeline he couldn't quite believe was real. "Talking?" he managed, his voice breaking slightly. "He's trained to detect things," Sarah explained carefully. "And right now, he's detecting something about you that's got him more focused than I've ever seen him. Can you tell me your name?" The man hesitated, his hand still resting on Duke's head. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Marcus. Marcus Thornton. Sergeant, U.S. Army, retired." The word retired came out bitter, laced with irony. "How long have you been out here, Marcus?" His laugh was hollow. "Out here? On the streets? Or out here in the world, pretending I'm still part of it?" Before Sarah could respond, Duke did something that would change everything. The dog shifted his position, moving closer to Marcus, and pressed his nose firmly against the veteran's chest, right over his heart. Then he looked at Sarah and barked once, sharp and clear. It was his medical alert bark, the one they'd trained for cardiac events and medical emergencies. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Marcus, when's the last time you saw a doctor?" The veteran's expression became guarded. "Don't need doctors. I'm fine." But Duke barked again, more insistently, his nose still pressed against Marcus's chest. The dog pawed at the ground, then at Marcus's jacket, pulling at the fabric with gentle but determined teeth. "Duke, what are you—" Sarah started, but then she saw it. On Marcus's inner wrist, barely visible below the layers of sleeves, was a medical alert bracelet, the kind that indicated serious health conditions. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice taking on no authority she rarely used. "Duke is trained in medical detection. He's alerting to something serious. I need you to be straight with me. What's the bracelet for?" The veteran's facade crumbled slightly. His hand went to his chest, pressing there as if feeling for something. "Heart condition," he admitted quietly. "Been having episodes. Ain't got insurance anymore. Can't afford the medication. Figured." He trailed off, his meaning clear. Figured he'd just let it run its course. Figured he'd die here, alone, on the cold floor of a subway station. Just another invisible casualty of a war that never quite ended, even when the shooting stopped. Duke whined again, pressing closer, and Marcus's tears finally fell, cutting clean tracks through the grime on his face. "I didn't think anybody cared anymore," he whispered. "Thought I was invisible. Thought I'd just fade away and nobody would notice." Sarah felt her own eyes burning. She keyed her radio with shaking fingers. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need an ambulance at Grand Central, Track 42 entrance. We have a medical situation priority." Around them, a small crowd had gathered, commuters slowing, phones out but faces showing genuine concern. The city, for all its reputation for coldness, had a heart after all. It just sometimes took a K-9 to remind people where to look. As they waited for the EMTs, Sarah sat down beside Marcus, and Duke positioned himself between them both, his body warm and solid and real. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, even when you feel most alone, someone is paying attention. Someone sees you. Marcus's hand never left Duke's fur. "How did he know?" he asked softly. Sarah looked at her partner, at the dog who had broken every protocol, who had seen past training and procedure to something more fundamental. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm learning that Duke sees things I miss. He doesn't just detect threats or drugs or danger. He detects need, human need, and somehow he knew yours was urgent." In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing closer. But in that moment, sitting on the cold floor of a subway station, with commuters streaming past and life continuing its relentless pace, three souls had intersected in a way that mattered. A veteran who thought he'd been forgotten, an officer learning to see with more than her eyes, and a dog who understood, perhaps better than any human could, that sometimes the most important alerts aren't about danger. They're about saving a life before it slips away into invisibility. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, its red and white lights painting the subway walls in urgent colors. Sarah stayed close to Marcus as the EMTs moved in with professional efficiency, their hands gentle despite the speed of their assessment. Duke remained planted at the veteran's side, refusing to move even when one of the paramedics tried to create more working space. "It's okay, boy," Marcus whispered, his voice stronger now that help had arrived, as if permission to need assistance had given him back some vital spark. "You did good. You did real good." The senior EMT, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and efficient movements, looked up at Sarah after checking Marcus's vitals. His heart rate's erratic. Blood pressure's dangerously low. How long has he been symptomatic? Marcus tried to wave her off. "I'm fine. Just a little tired is all." "Sir, you're not fine," the EMT interrupted firmly but kindly. "When did you last take your medication?" The silence that followed was answer enough. 3 weeks, Marcus finally admitted, his eyes downcast. "Maybe 4. Lost my prescription. Couldn't afford to refill it anyway." Sarah felt anger rise in her chest. Not at Marcus, but at a system that could let a man who'd serve his country end up here, rationing life-saving medication like it was a luxury. Duke seemed to sense her emotion, pressing against her leg in comfort even as he kept one paw on Marcus's knee. "We need to transport him," the EMT told Sarah. "Mount Sinai is closest. They have a good cardiac unit." "No," Marcus said suddenly, trying to sit up straighter. "No hospitals. Can't pay. They'll just—" "Marcus." Sarah's voice cut through his protest, not harsh but firm. "You're going. That's not negotiable. We'll figure out the rest later." Something in her tone, the same authority she used when Duke needed to obey for his own safety, made Marcus stop arguing. Or maybe it was the exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of fighting alone for so long. He nodded weakly, and the EMTs moved to load him onto the gurney. Duke whined, a sound of distress that made several onlookers' expressions soften. The dog tried to follow as they wheeled Marcus toward the ambulance bay. "Duke, stay," Sarah commanded, but her partner looked back at her with an expression so human, so full of concern, that she felt her resolve crumble. She looked at the senior EMT. "Can he ride along?" The woman glanced at Duke, then at Marcus, whose hand was reaching out toward the dog even as they moved him. "Department policy says no, but—" She paused, seeing something in the moment that transcended policy. "Yeah, he can ride and back. Something tells me it might actually help keep the patient calm." Sarah made a quick decision. "I'm coming too." 20 minutes later, they were in the cardiac wing of Mount Sinai Hospital. The transformation had been swift. Marcus going from invisible man on the street to patient surrounded by beeping monitors and concerned medical staff. But through it all, Duke had remained a constant presence, lying quietly beside the hospital bed after a nurse bent the rules about animals in patient rooms. "That dog's better medicine than half of what we got in pharmacy," the nurse, a young man named James, had said with a smile. "He stays." Sarah stood near the window, watching the city move past far below. Her radio had been busy, her supervisor calling for an explanation of why she'd abandoned her patrol route. She'd given the short version, promising a full report later. Now, in the relative quiet of the hospital room, with Marcus sleeping under sedation and Duke keeping vigil, she had time to think. Her phone buzzed. A text from her partner on the day's shift, Officer Mike Rodriguez. "Heard about your morning. Everything okay?" She typed back, "Define okay. Found a vet having a cardiac emergency." Duke detected it before anyone else noticed. The response came quickly. "That's our Duke. He's got a nose for trouble." "Not trouble," Sarah corrected. "Need. He's got a nose for need." She pocketed her phone and moved closer to the bed. Marcus looked smaller somehow, diminished by the white sheets and medical equipment. But his face, cleaned by the hospital staff, showed a man who'd once been handsome, strong. The kind of face you'd trust to have your back in the worst situations. Duke's tail thumped softly against the floor as Sarah approached. She reached down, scratching behind his ears. "You knew," she murmured. "Somehow you knew he was in trouble. How?" The dog just looked at her with those intelligent brown eyes, as if the answer was obvious. Sometimes his expression seemed to say, "You just know. You feel it in your bones, in your training, in something deeper than either." A doctor entered, a cardiologist named Dr. Patel, her expression serious but not unkind. "Officer Chin, can I speak with you outside?" Sarah followed her into the hallway, Duke padding along beside them. Dr. Patel glanced down at the K-9, then back at Sarah. Your dog saved that man's life. You understand that, right? Sarah nodded, waiting. Mr. Thornton has severe coronary artery disease. He's had at least 2 minor heart attacks in recent weeks. Probably dismiss them as indigestion or anxiety. His ejection fraction is dangerously low. She paused, choosing her words carefully. If he'd gone another day, maybe 2, without intervention, we'd be having a very different conversation. Probably in the morgue. The weight of those words settled over Sarah like a heavy coat. What's the prognosis? With proper medication and lifestyle changes, manageable. He'll need surgery eventually. Probably stents, maybe bypass. But the immediate crisis is contained. Dr. Patel hesitated. The challenge is what comes after. He's homeless, no insurance, no support system that we can find. We can treat the heart, but he's going to be released back to the streets, Sarah finished quietly. Unless something changes, yes. Sarah looked down at Duke, who sat patiently between them. The dog had found Marcus, had alerted to a medical emergency that no one else had noticed, had quite literally saved a veteran's life. And for what? To send him back to die slowly on a subway platform instead of quickly? No, Sarah said firmly. That's not happening. Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow. Officer, I appreciate the sentiment, but there are systems in place, social services. Systems that let him fall through cracks in the first place. Sarah interrupted. Systems that took a man who served his country and made him invisible. Well, he's not invisible anymore. Duke made sure of that. The doctor studied her for a long moment. What are you proposing? Sarah didn't have an answer yet, not fully formed. But as she stood there in that hospital corridor, with Duke sitting patiently beside her and Marcus sleeping in a room behind them, something crystallized in her mind. This wasn't just about one man. This was about all the Marcus Thorntons out there, the veterans who'd come home from war only to fight a different kind of battle on American streets. I'm proposing we don't let this story end here, Sarah said. Give me some time. Let me make some calls. Back in the room, Marcus stirred, his eyes opening slowly. He looked around, confused for a moment, before his gaze landed on Duke. The dog immediately stood, moving to the bedside, placing his head gently on the mattress where Marcus could reach him. Still here, Marcus whispered, his hand finding Duke's fur. Thought, maybe I dreamed you. He's not going anywhere, Sarah said, moving to the other side of the bed. None of us are. Not until we figure this out. Marcus's eyes filled again with tears he didn't try to hide. Why? He asked simply. Why do you care? You don't know me. I'm just another bum on the street. Sarah pulled up a chair, sitting down so they were eye level. You're not a bum, Marcus. You're a veteran. You served, and somewhere along the way, the country you served forgot to serve you back. That's not right. There are thousands like me, Marcus said quietly. Tens of thousands. What makes me special? Duke, Sarah said simply, gesturing to the K-9 who hadn't left Marcus's side. Duke made you special. He saw something in you, something worth saving. And I've learned to trust his instincts absolutely. Marcus looked at the dog, really looked at him, and something in his expression shifted. I had 8 K-9 partner, he said softly, in Afghanistan. German shepherd named Apollo. Best soldier I ever served with. His voice caught. He didn't make it home. Stepped on an IED during patrol. Saved 3 of us by alerting before we walked into the kill zone. But he didn't need to finish. Sarah understood. Duke seemed to understand too, pressing closer, offering comfort for a grief that had never properly healed. I think, Sarah said carefully, that Apollo will want you to accept the help Duke's offering. Don't you? Marcus's hand trembled on Duke's head. I don't know how to not be lost anymore, he admitted, the words raw and honest. I don't know how to find my way back. Then we'll find together, Sarah promised. You, me, and Duke. One step at a time. Outside the hospital window, the city continued its endless dance of motion and life. But inside that room, time had slowed to something more human, more manageable. A veteran who'd been invisible was now seen. An officer who thought she was just doing her job was discovering a deeper calling. An K-9 who'd been trained to detect threats had detected something far more important: the presence of soul that needed saving. Duke's tail wagged slowly, steadily, as if to say, "This is what we do. This is why we serve. Not just to protect from danger, but to rescue from darkness. Not just to enforce the law, but to enforce compassion, dignity, humanity." In the hallway outside, Sarah could hear the hospital's rhythm: the beeping of monitors, the quiet conversations, the footsteps of staff moving with purpose. But in this room, there was only the sound of breathing, the soft thump of a dog's tail, and the beginning of something that felt like hope. Marcus fell back asleep, his hand still resting on Duke's head. Sarah pulled out her phone and began making calls. First to the VA, then to veteran services organizations, then to a reporter she knew who specialized in human interest stories. If Duke had taught her anything today, it was that sometimes one story, one life, one moment of caring could ripple outward in ways you couldn't predict. Duke watched her work, his eyes knowing and patient. He'd done his part. He'd found the person who needed help. Now came the harder work, the human work, of making sure that help actually arrived. But as the afternoon sun slanted through the hospital window, painting everything in golden light, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected: certainty. This was why she'd become an officer, not for the arrests or the accolades, but for moments like this, when doing the right thing wasn't complicated or political or controversial. It was simply right. And Duke, wise beyond his years and species, seemed to know it too. The hospital room had become a temporary sanctuary. 3 days had passed since Duke's intervention, and Marcus Thornton was stable, his heart responding well to medication and rest. But Sarah could see the anxiety growing in his eyes each time a doctor or social worker entered the room. Everyone kept using the word discharge like it was a positive thing, but both Marcus and Sarah knew the truth. Discharge meant back to the streets, back to the cold subway platform, back to invisibility. Duke had become something of a celebrity in the cardiac ward. Nurses stopped by during breaks just to see him, to scratch behind his ears and marvel at the dog who detected a medical emergency that human training had missed. One nurse, an older woman named Patricia who'd worked there for 30 years, told Sarah, "In all my time here, I've never seen anything like it. That dog has better diagnostic instincts than some doctors I know." But acclaim wasn't what kept Duke planted beside Marcus's bed. It was something deeper, a connection that transcended species and training. Sarah had watched it develop over the past 72 hours. The way Marcus's hand automatically reached for Duke's fur when monitors beeped, the way the dog's presence seemed to regulate the veteran's heart rate better than some of the medications, the way they communicated in silence. On the 4th morning, Sarah arrived to find Marcus awake and staring at the ceiling, his expression distant. Duke was alert immediately, sensing the shift in his emotional state. "Couldn't sleep?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair she'd occupied so often it had worn a groove to fit her. Marcus didn't look at her. "Keep having the dreams. Same ones I've had for 8 years. Afghanistan, the firefight where Apollo died, the sound of the IED, the screaming." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Doctors call it PTSD. I call it Tuesday." Sarah had read his file, obtained through official channels once she'd gotten involved. Sergeant Marcus Thornton, 2 tours in Afghanistan, decorated for valor, discharged honorably after his K-9 partner was killed in action. But the file was just paper. It didn't capture the weight of what he carried. "Have you been getting treatment for it?" she asked gently. His laugh was bitter. "Treatment requires insurance. Insurance requires a job. Jobs require an address. Addresses require money. Money requires..." He trailed off, the circular logic of homelessness complete. "System's not designed for people like me. It's designed to shuffle us around until we disappear." Duke whined softly, pressing his nose against Marcus's hand. The veteran's fingers curled into the dog's fur, holding on like it was a lifeline. "What happened, Marcus?" Sarah asked. "After you came home. How did you end up on the streets?" For a long moment, she didn't think he'd answer. Then, slowly, the words began to flow. "I had a plan. Everyone does when they get discharged. I was going to use my GI Bill, go to college, become a veterinarian, work with K-9 units, help other dogs like Apollo. His voice grew quieter, but the dream started immediately. Couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't be in crowded places without panicking. The fireworks on 4th of July nearly put me in the hospital. He shifted in the bed, and Duke adjusted his position to stay close. I tried the VA, waited months for an appointment. When I finally got in, they prescribed pills. Lots of pills. Some helped, some made it worse. I couldn't tell anymore. Started missing appointments because I couldn't handle the crowds in the waiting room. They labeled me non-compliant. He laughed again, that same hollow sound. Non-compliant, like I was choosing to be broken. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest again. That same fury at systems that failed the people they were supposed to serve. Lost my apartment because I couldn't work regular hours. The night terrors made me scream, kept the neighbors awake. Landlord evicted me. Ended up in my car for a while, but then the car got impounded when I couldn't pay parking tickets. After that, he gestured vaguely. After that, the streets. It happens faster than you'd think. One day you're a decorated soldier. The next you're invisible. You're not invisible, Sarah said firmly. Not anymore. Marcus finally looked at her, his faded blue eyes searching her face. What happens when you leave, Officer Chun? When Duke goes back to his regular duties. When I'm discharged from here and the story ends, I'll be invisible again. That's just how it works. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and felt her pulse quicken. "Excuse me," she said, stepping into the hallway. The call was from Jennifer Walsh, the reporter Sarah had contacted 3 days ago. Jennifer specialized in investigative journalism focused on veteran issues, and she'd been interested in Marcus's story from the moment Sarah had outlined it. "Sarah, I've been doing some digging." Jennifer's voice was excited. "Marcus Thornton's story is bigger than we thought. I found 12 other veterans, just in the tri-state area, with similar trajectories. Decorated service, PTSD, inadequate VA care, homelessness. It's a pattern. Can you help him?" Sarah asked directly. "I can do better than that. I can shine a light on the whole system. But I need Marcus to go on record. Can he handle that?" Sarah looked back to the window at Marcus, who was talking quietly to Duke, his hand never leaving the dog's fur. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'll ask." When she returned to the room, Marcus looked up expectantly. Sarah sat down and laid it out plainly. The reporter, the story, the potential to help not just him but countless others. "But it means going public," she finished. "Telling your story. All of it." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Duke's tail thumped softly, as if encouraging him. "I spent 8 years trying to disappear," Marcus said finally. "Trying to not be a burden, not be seen. And you're asking me to do the opposite. I'm asking you to fight one more battle," Sarah said. "Not with weapons, but with truth. Your truth." Marcus looked at Duke, and something unspoken passed between them. The dog's eyes were steady, calm, certain. Finally, Marcus nodded. "Okay, I'll do it. For Apollo. For all the Apollos who didn't make a home, and all the handlers who did but got lost anyway." The interview was scheduled for the next day. Jennifer arrived with a small camera crew, professional but respectful. She'd done her homework, approaching the story with the gravity it deserved. Marcus sat in his hospital bed, Duke at his side, and told his story. Not just the facts, but the feelings. The guilt of surviving when Apollo hadn't. The shame of becoming homeless. The desperation of needing help, but not knowing how to ask for it. The invisibility of being a veteran in a country that thanked you for your service but didn't follow through. And he told him about Duke, about a K-9 who'd seen him when no one else had, who detected not just a medical emergency, but a human soul in crisis. "This dog," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly as his hand rested on Duke's head, "saw me. Really saw me, not as a problem, or a statistic, or someone to avoid, as a person worth saving, as a soldier who still had something to offer. I don't know what I did to deserve that, but I'm grateful, more grateful than I can say." The footage was powerful. Even the cameraman had tears in his eyes by the end. Jennifer promised to have the story ready within 48 hours. This is going to air nationally, she told Sarah afterward. It's exactly the kind of human interest piece that cuts through the noise. A hero dog saving a forgotten hero. It's going to resonate. That night, as Sarah prepared to leave for the evening, Marcus called her back. Officer Chun, Sarah, I need to ask you something. She waited. What happens after? After the story airs and people feel good for a moment and then move on to the next thing? What happens to me then? It was a question Sarah had been grappling with for days. The truth was, she didn't know. The system was broken, and one news story, however moving, wouldn't fix it overnight. But as she looked at Duke, at the dog who'd refused to give up on Marcus, even when it defied protocol, she realized something. I don't know what the system will do, she admitted, but I know what I'll do. I won't let you disappear again. Duke won't let you disappear. We're in this now all the way through. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. Why? Why do you care this much? Sarah smiled, reaching down to scratch Duke's ears. Because Duke taught me something. He taught me that our job isn't just to enforce laws or maintain order. It's to see people. Really see them. And once you see someone, truly see them, you can't unsee them. You become responsible, in a way. Not legally, but morally. Duke's tail wagged, as if approving of this philosophy. Outside the hospital window, the city was settling into its evening rhythm. Lights flickered on in thousands of windows, each one representing a life, a story, a struggle. Somewhere out there were more Marcus Thorntons, more invisible veterans fighting silent battles. Sarah couldn't save them all, but she could save one. And maybe, just maybe, that one story would inspire others to see the invisible people in their own lives. Duke stood, stretching, then moved to press against Sarah's leg. His message was clear. Time to rest. Tomorrow brings new challenges. Marcus was already drifting off, the medication and exhaustion finally overcoming the anxiety. For the first time since Sarah had met him, his face looked peaceful. As she and Duke left the hospital that night, Sarah felt the weight of what they'd started. This wasn't a simple rescue anymore. It was a commitment, a promise, a declaration that one veteran's life mattered enough to fight for. Duke walked beside her, proud and purposeful, unaware that he'd started something much bigger than a medical alert. He'd started a movement of seeing, of caring, of refusing to let good people become invisible. The story aired on a Wednesday evening, prime time, when millions of Americans were settling in after dinner. Jennifer Walsh had crafted it perfectly, weaving together Marcus's testimony, footage of Duke's unwavering loyalty, and interviews with VA officials who squirmed under questions about veteran homelessness. The piece was titled simply, The K-9 Who Wouldn't Look Away. Sarah watched it from Marcus's hospital room, Duke lying between them. As Marcus's face filled the screen, telling his story with raw honesty, she saw him tense beside her. Watching yourself be vulnerable on national television wasn't easy, even when you consented to it. But then the responses started coming in. The hospital's switchboard lit up within minutes. Emails flooded Jennifer's inbox. Social media exploded with the hashtag #DukeSees. But more importantly, tangible help began to materialize in ways Sarah hadn't dared to hope for. By Thursday morning, a veterans advocacy organization called Battle Buddies had reached out offering to cover Marcus's medical expenses and provide transitional housing. A corporate sponsor stepped forward to fund his medication indefinitely. 3 different veteran-owned companies offered him job interviews, positions that came with mental health support and flexible scheduling for PTSD treatment. Dr. Patel delivered the news personally, her earlier skepticism replaced with genuine amazement. Mr. Thornton, it seems your story has touched some very generous hearts. We have multiple organizations competing to help you. This is unprecedented. Marcus sat in stunned silence, looking from the doctor to Sarah to Duke. I don't understand, he whispered. This doesn't happen. People don't actually help. They do when they can see you, Sarah said softly. Duke made sure they could see you. But the most unexpected call came Friday afternoon. Sarah's phone rang with a Virginia area code she didn't recognize. Officer Chin? This is Colonel Rita Vance, retired, calling from the War Dogs Memorial Foundation. We've been following Sergeant Thornton's story. The woman's voice was crisp, military efficient, but warm. We have a proposal that might interest you both. An hour later, Sarah was on speakerphone with Colonel Vance, Marcus, and Duke in the hospital room. Dr. Patel had joined them, curious about this new development. The War Dogs Memorial Foundation operates a sanctuary in Virginia. Colonel Vance explained. It's a working farm where we train service dogs for veterans with PTSD, but it's also a healing space for the veterans themselves. We pair handlers who've lost their K-9 partners with dogs who need training. It's therapy for both. Marcus's hand tightened on Duke's fur. I don't have any money. This isn't about money, Sergeant. It's about service. We have a position available, assistant trainer. Room and board included, full medical benefits through our partnership with the VA. And most importantly, you'd be working with K-9s every day, helping other veterans heal by helping dogs learn to serve. The room fell silent. Sarah watched Marcus's face cycle through disbelief, hope, fear, and something she hadn't seen before. Possibility. Why me? Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. There are thousands of homeless vets, better trained, less broken. Because Duke chose you, Colonel Vance said simply. That dog's instincts are famous now, Sergeant. If he saw something in you worth saving, worth protecting, then I trust that judgment. Dogs don't lie. They don't have agendas. They just know. Duke, as if understanding he was being discussed, sat up straighter, his tail wagging slowly. There's one condition, the colonel continued. You have to commit to your own healing. Therapy, medication, compliance. The whole program. We can't help you if you won't help yourself. Marcus looked at Sarah, then at Duke, then at his own hands, scarred and weathered from years on the street. I don't know if I remember how to not be broken, he admitted. None of us do at first, Colonel Vance replied. That's why we do it together. That's why we have the dogs. They remind us that healing isn't about being fixed. It's about being seen, being valued, being given purpose again. Sarah leaned forward. Marcus, this is what Duke was alerting to. Not just your heart condition, your whole situation. He detected someone who needed saving, and he didn't stop at just a medical emergency. He brought people together, brought resources together, brought hope together. Don't let his instincts be wrong. Marcus's eyes filled with tears that he didn't try to hide anymore. Apollo would have liked you, Duke, he said softly to the K-9. He would have been proud to have you carry on. Duke's response was to place his paw on Marcus's knee, the same gesture he'd made that first day in the subway. A promise. I'm here. I see you. You matter. I'll do it, Marcus said, his voice stronger now. I'll try. For Apollo. For Duke. For all the soldiers who didn't make a home. The next week moved in a blur of activity. Dr. Patel cleared Marcus for discharge with a comprehensive care plan. Battle buddies provided new clothes, proper documentation, and transportation arrangements. Jennifer Walsh did follow-up piece, tracking the outpouring support and announcing Marcus's new position. But the hardest part came on Marcus's last day in New York. Sarah arrived at the hospital early with Duke to say goodbye. The veteran was dressed in clean clothes, his duffel bag packed with new belongings instead of desperate survival gear. He looked different, not just cleaner, but lighter somehow, as if hope had physical weight he'd been allowed to set down. Duke bounded over immediately, and Marcus dropped his knees, wrapping his arms around K-9. I owe you my life, soldier, he whispered into the dog's fur. I don't know how I can ever repay that. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Over the past 10 days, she'd watched an incredible bond form between her K-9 partner and this broken veteran. Duke had been different too, more purposeful, as if he'd found a calling beyond his training. He knows, Sarah said. Dogs don't need repayment. They just need you to live. Really live. That's enough. Marcus stood slowly, facing Sarah. I spent 8 years invisible. 8 years thinking I didn't matter, that the world would be better if I just faded away. And then this dog, his voice broke. This amazing dog refused to let me disappear. He saw me when I couldn't see myself. That's what Duke does, Sarah said, smiling through her own tears. He sees what we miss, and he makes us better by showing us what really matters. There was a knock at the door. Colonel Vance had arrived personally to drive Marcus to Virginia. She was a tall woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone who commanded respect her entire life. But her eyes were kind as she shook Marcus's hand. "Ready, Sergeant?" Marcus hesitated, looking back at Duke one more time. The K-9 sat attention, tail wagging slowly, eyes bright and certain. "Thank you," Marcus said to Sarah, "for listening to him, for not walking away." "Thank you for letting us help," Sarah replied, "for being brave enough to be seen." As they walked toward the exit, hospital staff lined the hallways, applauding quietly. The nurses who bent rules to let Duke stay. The doctors who'd treated more than just physical ailments. The cleaning staff who'd heard Marcus's story and been moved by it. All of them bearing witness to something rare, a genuine happy ending. Outside, morning sun painted the city in gold. The same subway entrance where Marcus had sat invisible just days ago was visible down the street. But everything had changed. Colonel Vance's car pulled away, and Sarah watched until it disappeared into traffic. Duke pressed against her leg, and she looked down at her partner. "You know what you did, don't you?" she asked softly. "You didn't just save a life. You reminded everyone watching that invisible people aren't invisible at all. We just have to be willing to see them." Duke's tail wagged, his expression almost smug. Of course he knew. Sarah's radio crackled. "Unit 12, what's your status?" She keyed the mic. Unit 12 returned to patrol. But as she and Duke walked back toward the subway station, something had fundamentally shifted. Sarah found herself looking at people differently now, really looking at them. The businessman rushing past might be struggling with depression. The teenager slumped on a bench might be homeless. The elderly woman feeding pigeons might be desperately lonely. Duke had taught her that their job wasn't just about detecting threats. It was about detecting need, humanity, the invisible struggles people carry behind their public faces. They took up their patrol position near the main terminal. Commuters flowed past like always, each lost in their own worlds. But Sarah noticed more now. The subtle signs of distress, the body language of desperation, the masks people wore to hide their pain. And Duke, ever vigilant, watched with her. 3 months later, Sarah received a package from Virginia. Inside was a photo of Marcus, clean-shaven and smiling, standing beside a young German shepherd in training. The dog's vest read, "Service Dog in Training." Marcus's face glowed with purpose and pride. The note was simple. Apollo would be proud. Duke made this possible. Thank you for seeing me when I've forgotten how to be seen. Teaching others to see now. Sergeant Marcus Thornton. Sarah pinned the photo to her locker at the precinct. Other officers stopped to read it, to hear the story, to understand what one K-9's instincts had set in motion. Duke's legend grew. Other handlers started paying more attention to their partners' alerts, trusting instincts over protocol. The NYPD began implementing new training focused on detecting distress, not just danger. One story, one dog, one veteran had created ripples that spread further than anyone had imagined. But for Sarah and Duke, it was simpler than that. They'd learned that heroism wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just refusing to look away, refusing to let someone disappear, refusing to accept that invisible meant unimportant. As they walked their patrol that evening, the subway humming with life around them, Duke suddenly stopped. His ears perked, his nose lifted, his body tense with that familiar alert. Sarah's hand went to his harness. "What is it, boy?" Duke pulled forward gently, leading her toward a young woman sitting alone on a bench, her body language screaming distress even as she tried to blend into the background. Sarah smiled softly. Here we go again. Because Duke had taught her the most important lesson of her career. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone matters. And sometimes, all it takes is one good dog and one willing heart to prove it. "Let's go help," Sarah whispered. And together, they moved forward into another story, another life, another chance to make visible what the world had learned to ignore. Duke's tail wagged with purpose. After all, this was what they did. This was why they served. Not just to protect, but to see, to care, to remind the world that no one, absolutely no one, is invisible if someone is brave enough to look.